Connecting. There we go.
Awesome. Welcome, Nick Peterson, to the podcast from Mastery Mode. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Looking forward to jamming with you for a little bit.
Yeah, jamming is the word I used and I borrow it off you. So thanks for that. Yeah. So Nick's got awesome experience previously in fitness, running multiple businesses. And I mean, most people listening to this are struggling to run one business. So I'm very interested in Nick's perspective on running multiple businesses over time, successfully exiting them, and even running multiple ones at once. So Nick, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you're doing that?
Yeah. Excuse me, I got a little bit of a cough here. It's been a process. I'm a starter, so I do my best to bucket people up in order to help them, which just means like, is this a super analytical person? Is this, are they high on the fact finder scale? Yada, yada, yada. And me, I am not high on the fact finder scale. I'm what we call a starter. If I'm excited about something, I can create momentum and market. People that are natural marketers, natural salespeople, we're starters, right? So what happens is we start something, and this will be a lot of business owners probably listening. You're good at something, you're passionate about something, and you start something. And then like it works. You're like, oh, wow, this worked. Okay. And then you hit a point where no matter how much you market and sell, like your revenue, your profit doesn't grow, your quality of life doesn't improve, right? And the natural thing to do is like, all right, I'll find something else to market and sell, whether it be a new business or a new offer or whatever. And so we lean on our strengths. And so my first 3 companies were that way. I built the first one to 7 figures. It was a gym. The second one to 7 figures, it was a nutrition company. Because in both cases, I hit a point where the actual scaling of the business, the systems, the operations, the hiring, all that stuff is not my strength. So it's actually easier for me to just create something new. So I did that. And anybody that has a business knows it's difficult. It's time consuming. And now I had 2 of these things. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to market and sell a new thing. I sold, I say I burnt them down, but I actually sold those 2 companies. I had co-founders. I sold the companies to my partners, and I launched a third one. And the third one went from 0 to $1.2 million a month in 4 months. So at this point, I'm really good at starting stuff, right? Same thing. I hit another wall, and I said, you know what? Forget this, and I sold it. And at that point, I'd made enough money to just chill for I spent about 1.5 years just really reflecting on, is this going to be my life? Am I going to be on a cycle of marketing and selling and marketing and selling? And I joined high-level masterminds. I got in rooms with really smart people that have 8, 9, 10. My partner has an 11-figure business, and said, how are they getting here without wanting to kill themselves? And I realized they have a few things in common. The thing they had in common, the one underlying thing that they all had in common was they had a focus on systems and operations. Systems and operations stayed centralized, right? And I said, well, that's not my strength, so I got to find somebody. And what I did is I went, and this is very characteristic of me. I will go find the best in the world. Like I will ask and travel, and I'll find them. And I found who's my partner now, Dan, and he is a system guy. He's brilliant, and I have the skill he doesn't have. I could create anything out of nothing, right? So there was some synergy there, and he sold his business. So neither one of us needed the money, but we said we want to have an impact. We want to do a lot of stuff. We want to run a lot of companies. I can start them, and he knows how to run them. So it's a good relationship, right? And then it became apparent that people with my skill set communicate different than people with his skill set. So we spent probably 6 months. First we said, look, let's agree that we just put everything out there, no hard feelings. We just get at each other to get better. And we spent about 6 months just creating a method of communicating. Because I'm ready, fire, aim, and he's measure, manage, right? So we built that, and he took a lot of the decisions that I make intuitively and was able to codify them into a process. I took a lot of the way that I started to understand the things that he needs in order to be effective as a technician. And we found this middle, it's different for everybody, right? Like different companies, different offers, different personalities. We found this middle ground where I now know, and we built a method around it called the velocity method. I now know exactly how much we can take on without putting us over what we call our bumpers, our boundaries. So we launched a company, and he said, this is what we need. What are our non-negotiables? Because we're building, I assume everybody listening that has a business for something other than to have a job, right? They want freedom or wealth, or, they want to build wells in Africa, like whatever it is. So we said, what are those reasons? And I said, I have to make this much money in my pocket after taxes, and I need this much mandatory fulfillment, and this is the kind of freedom I need. He said, okay. And then he listed out his, right? And so every decision we make now, we have these boundaries. We've figured out how much can I ready, fire, aim, and how much can he micromanage and keep us inside of those boundaries. Because if we go outside those boundaries, what's the point? We're not building the life we want, right? And what happens is he becomes a little less micromanagey because he has to work with me, and I become less ready, fire, aim. And we can systematically, we just actually bought another company, so that makes 6. It just went through like last week, so we're transferring all the assets over. We can systematically take on new companies, launch new offers, all that stuff. And there's really just an algorithm. Does this fit within our boundaries or not? So it's cool. It's really cool because it's limiting, and it feels limiting because I can't do everything I want to do. But never before, no way I couldn't even manage 2 companies, right? And now there's 6. So it seems limiting, but it's not. It's really, really cool. So we've built a framework to make decisions from.
So let's talk about that acquisition, because I think that's possibly something that scares a lot of people listening. So just talk us through the process. If you've identified this company, ignoring the financials, how do you decide that it's not going to be something that is going to bog you down? And because no company is going to have the types of systems you're talking about, how do you put them in without going mad?
Few things. Foundationally, we built the very first company we built was to install systems and operations in other companies, right? Because I decided without that we're screwed. So first we have the resources, which is step 1. And if you're listening and you go, oh, well, that's not me. Hopefully it's motivation for you to go install systems right now so that you develop that skill set, right? And then here's the framework we use. Here's part of our decision-making framework that I think anybody over 7 figures or even under has to operate this way. Because when you start talking about multiple 7, 8 figures, you start talking about there's a lot of, there's money coming in, money going out. You have a lot of employees. There's lots of lines of communication. A lot of things can go wrong. We only invest time, money, and resources. There's the day-to-day, obviously, right? But additional time, money, and resources into identifying the number 1 limit to scale, right? So what is the 1 limit to scale? So in theory, we would only buy a company if it is solving that problem, right? So let's say you have a great offer, whatever, and somehow you identify, okay, we're not making enough sales, but this is a sophisticated offer. I need a bigger audience. That's the limit right now. Then it would make sense to go buy an audience or build an audience. You could do the math to figure out which one is a better move for you, right?
Mm.
And that's exactly what happened, actually. We identified our limit to scale is if people know who Nick is, they buy stuff from him. And our biggest limit, our operations are super tight. Our profit margins are great. Our close percentage is like 90%. So the one biggest limit is a growing audience. So then it becomes, okay, that's the limit. That's the kink in the hose. And until we remove that kink, it won't matter. Nothing else will matter, right? And then the process became, okay, do we spend money to grow our Facebook group? Do I go speak, which sounds horrible. I don't want to go on stages. How do we build the audience? And we had two solutions. One, schedule as many podcasts as possible. And here I am on a podcast, right? And two, let's spend some of our extra time, bandwidth, energy, just exploring, really taking time to see if there is an ideal audience for sale somewhere. Right? Maybe an entry level, a front end business, a front end offer that is for sale. And it just so happens there was one for sale that had a big audience of our ideal clients, and it was cheaper than it would have been to build my own audience. Right? So that's how we mitigate the risk is we don't go buy a business just to grow. We purchase or we find the asset that's going to solve the biggest problem in our business. Right? So in theory, it's not more time, effort, and work. It's actually a shortcut.
That's a fantastic insight. And I think why most businesses fail through acquisition, or most acquisitions fail, because they're trying to do more of the same thing and it just increases the complexity rather than decreases it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it does help that we were able to purchase it at a very, very, very low cost for us because even though it might have been a high cost to other people, we have the systems in place to monetize an audience, which makes it more valuable to us. And the only reason it wasn't more expensive is the dysfunction in the company with systems and operations, which is something we know how to fix. So that's I'll give you an example of people come and say, oh, I don't know what to do. Profit margins are low. Bandwidth is low. This department wants me to make flyers. A lot of brick and mortar. We have a lot of brick and mortar clients. They want me to invest in a new coaching program. Them over here, they want to put billboards up. And that's all extraneous stuff, right? What is the one limit to scale right now? That's the question we have. What's the one limit? And we find out it's just where it's a youth hockey league that I'm talking about specifically. And the one limit is that nobody in LA knows who they are. Everybody in Irvine, Orange County knows who they are, right? So the one limit is the kids in LA don't know about us, but if they did, we would be at capacity all the time. Okay, so if that's the limit, this person wants a new coaching program. Does that get people in LA to know you? No? Okay, we don't do it, right? It's a filter now. And that's how you mitigate. That's just really how you, in our opinion, that's how you mitigate the waste. You only do things that remove the limit. And if you're always removing a limit, you're always growing.
And so if you've got 3 identified limits, you just pick one and solve it and then move on to the next one.
Well, you have probably more sophisticated listeners, so I'll go a little deeper. You think of, we have 3. Okay? We have marketing and sales, fulfillment, and finances, right? So the marketing and sales department is always identifying the marketing and sales limit. The fulfillment and operations department is always dealing with that limit, right? What's client retention, all that stuff. And then finance is always dealing with that limit, we're overspending on this or whatever. However, if you're a solopreneur and you're all 3, then you can't do that. So then it's a matter of sequence. You think of everybody wants to turn on this water faucet. right? And then have a whole bunch of throughput. A bunch of stuff comes out the end, which is money. If you can identify the sequence, like, hey, there's 3 kinks in the hose, but we have to remove this very first kink. Otherwise, we could remove that last kink and it still doesn't improve the throughput, right? So it's removing them in the correct order, the correct sequence. Like, you can, maybe your onboarding is horrible, right? But if your sales is horrible, there's no sense in fixing your onboarding if there's no sales coming in. You put time and resources into something that's not cash flow positive. So you fix your sales first, and then you fix the onboarding. So understanding like the client journey is really important as well. So if you have departments, each department has its own limit. If you're a solopreneur or a small team, you just do it in sequence. Like, there's no sense in training your sales team to get better if you don't have anybody to talk to.
So in that sense, let's say we've got a business with 5 staff and one of them's the sales guy, one's the finance guy, one's the operations, and there's a couple of admin and delivery. So let me interpret, but basically what you're saying is, because those are not departments or divisions with like strong executive leadership, they should really focus on one goal as a team and solve it in sequence, rather than saying the sales guy can deal with that sales and the operations and the delivery and the finance at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's that sometimes it's hard to get everybody on board, because if you just had like the finance guy, your CFO guy can just sit there and blame everybody else, but that doesn't help the company. So it's really like, look, our number one limit is sales. Let's just say then we say, why is it sales? Is it leads? Is it quality of leads? Is it close percentage? So let's say that it's the leads are good, the quality is good, we decide the close percentage is bad. Okay. Everybody in the organization they shouldn't abandon their day jobs, but with all the extra, instead of making flyers or downloading new, whatever, any extra bandwidth, we should be saying, okay, how can we help improve the close percentage? From a finance perspective, how much money can we put into improving this problem? From an operation perspective, can we build systems that help identify what makes a good prospect? Right? Can we get data? Like, everything has to go to improving the sales. Once the sales is improved, we have a new limit, and everybody should focus on that. Eventually, you got 3 people in your marketing team, you got 5 people in fulfillment, and you got a CFO, plus I really think the founder or the CEO should be involved in finances. And then it becomes, we call them rounds. Every round, the marketing team is focused 100% on removing the marketing issues. And if they need support from other people, that's fine. But that's the process, man. It makes it so much easier when you have this filter, because again, like, I think we need this new software that will help us, save, if we do more than $1 million, it'll help us save this in tax savings. And like, the reality is, if we don't fix our sales, we're not going to make $1 million.
Yeah.
So let's right thing at the right time.
That's exactly what happens with some of my prospects. They usually come in at one of 2 ends of the buyer's journey. It's either I just need more leads, or they want to solve some operational problem that is totally removed from the actual constraint in their business. And yeah, usually, at least with the people I'm dealing with, usually it's actually a conversion problem, but they think it's a lead generation problem, because that's what they're used to.
Here's a beautiful thing that you probably understand, and a lot of your listeners probably understand too. We want it to be a conversion problem, right? Because from a system standpoint, there's like how many conversion points? There's like from website to opt-in, from opt-in to watching your video, from video. You only have to improve each step by like 3% to like double your revenue. You don't have to double the number of leads.
Yeah.
So if we can get somebody to make that shift to like, let's just improve each touch point by 5%, it's way more profitable than trying to triple the number of leads you have.
That's probably a good dovetail into, you've alluded to it, you've mentioned the velocity method. I have a strong background in Agile. I am a customer of your velocity method course. I've gone about halfway through it. And I was actually approached by EOS to, that's the Entrepreneur Operating System for those that don't know, to be a consultant of theirs. But you've essentially combined the best of all of these worlds, Six Sigma, EOS, Agile, Scrum. Just talk about that a bit, because the biggest constraint that I see in most of these businesses is actually getting any bandwidth and attention on improving the business. So you've just talked about the strategy of it is to focus on this one goal, but the tactical execution of that, how do they do that?
Oh man. So first of all, EOS, Agile, Scrum, they're not wrong. It's kind of like line by line accounting. On like, to a linear thinker on paper, it makes sense. That's just not how our brain works. People are far more successful, for example, with profit first than they are line by line bookkeeping. So the biggest thing is, my background's cognitive behavior therapy. I'm not an expert in anything, but I know experts. And I'm really good at saying things in a way that changes your behavior versus being right. So the velocity method was built on changing your behavior to get you closer to your goals, not in being technically right, because EOS is technically correct. Like that is how you can build systems. Same with Agile, same with Scrum. What's missing in those is, like, Agile and Scrum are, if you're not familiar with Agile Scrum, it's a tech task management philosophy. It's based heavily on, like, whether it's intentional or not, guilt and shame and punishment, and everybody being rushed. And EOS is built what we call waterfall. I don't know why we call it that. It's just the waterfall. Like, we just start systematizing things. The problem is, as an entrepreneur, as a business, momentum is everything. So when I'm marketing, I'm selling, I'm cruising, and you say, whoa, stop for 6 weeks so we can systematize things. You just stop the freight train. And, like, when a freight train's going, you just let it go. When you stop it, it's really hard. It takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to get it going again. So velocity was built in a way to, we don't go, okay, we start at the top and build the systems all the way down. We say, what's the one limit? Okay, we remove the limit, we build the systems and operations around it, so that instead of slowing the movers, the visionaries down, we're actually speeding them up. And we're building systems and operations behind it. Now, the cool thing is, you find a limit, you find the limit, you remove it, you build the systems and operations around it, right? And the next one, and the next one, and eventually, you just keep scaling. And there are things that don't get systematized, which drives system people crazy. But here's the reality. They were never, if that's the case, then they were never a limit to scale. So do we really want to spend resources on them? Maybe we're going to turn around and sell it. But when you're in growth mode, you don't put resources to something that's not going to remove a limit. Right? And so that's how we combine them, is we just took the best of them, and then we said, there's a guilt and a shame component of this that it makes employees not, like, people that operate in Agile, like an Agile framework, hate it. It feels like a lot of pressure. It feels like it's nonstop. It feels like they got to just, like, do drugs, like, take Adderall and work all the time. And people in EOS, like me, they give up. They give up 60 or 70% of the way there because they just want to go back to growing the business. They don't want to document everything. And so we just built it in a way, this is okay, well, is there a way to remove the guilt and shame? And is there a way to maintain momentum and still get the systems built? And so that's all it is. If you imagine, it's like digging a tunnel almost, right? Like, you dig a tunnel, and then somebody comes in behind you. In this case, it's my COO, and he builds the infrastructure so the thing doesn't collapse down. And that's all it is. Identify the limit, remove it. I think most people struggle with identifying the limit. I think that's probably the biggest thing. They've been told by internet marketers what they need to focus on instead of actually looking at like, where's the kink in my hose? But it is an incredibly simple, efficient way to operate. But it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to do the EOS method. If you've been in business for like 20 years, there's like 20 years of stuff up here that you got to document in like 6 weeks, and it's hard. So that's kind of how we jammed it all together. The most practical thing, what's the limit? Like if you say what is the limit, and then use that as a filter. I really think we should go to this event over in, this location. Like, does that solve the thing that we agreed is the limit? No, then we're not doing it.
So the great thing about, and look, to be fair, Agile does do this as well, but you get a measuring stick at the end. So you're saying there's this limit. The hesitation people will have is like, but that's only solving one problem. Mm-hmm. And you'd be like, yeah, but we're actually solving it as opposed to trying to solve 5 or 10 problems and getting nowhere. But the thing I found fascinating about what you were just talking about is, because I've heard you and Dan talk about rounds and velocity. So velocity is directional speed. So speed in the right direction, the right strategic direction. But that language is on purpose, because what you're saying with that cognitive background is it's not a sprint. Like, functionally, it actually is an agile sprint. Like, it's pretty much the same concept, but you've chosen that language carefully because you don't want the implication of a sprint is burnout at the end of it.
Well, there's also, this is the image I use, and these things come very natural to me because I think in images, right? So I have these images in my head. You can move really, really, really fast in a big circle, right, at a high speed, and still be where you started. You can also move even worse. You can sprint in the wrong direction, so that's exactly why we chose velocity. Is it's speed with the vector component. Like, are we actually making progress in the right direction?
I've got to put my hand up as being guilty of that. When I started this business, I did everything like that the internet marketers kind of said to do. And as a result, to be honest, I achieved almost nothing of it. It was only when I picked that one thing that things actually started to work.
Mm-hmm. And here's a good example, because it's, if you know me, like we probably have you probably have listeners from our ecosystem. It seems people ask me all the time, how do you do so much? You talk about focus, but you got all these different businesses and all these different offers. And the reality is I don't do it. I just do the same thing. I'm hyper focused on removing the limit, but because we go in and we build that framework, I dig the tunnel. Like, my focus is digging this tunnel, but because most entrepreneurs dig a tunnel and then let it collapse behind them, we're actually building the framework to sustain it, that I could be focused on one thing right here. I'm always hyper focused on a limit. But all the other stuff I did in the past is still running. So it seems like I'm doing 15 different things. And that's the fear for people that want to do 5 or 6 different things, is that if I focus on one, I'll lose all the others. But the reality is the only way to maintain all the others is to focus on one at a time. That's just,
I'm picturing a military analogy here. Either, you're installing the provincial governors along the way as you conquer new territory, or you're personally the Marines launching on the beach and taking enemy territory and then letting the supply chain catch up.
Yeah. And if you do it right, you don't have to focus on conquering all of the cities at the same time, right? You just focus on one. And then you have the frameworks to get it to sustain itself, and then the next, and then the next. And that's all it is. I tell people all the time, you can have your cake and eat it too. You just can't do both right now. And that's the trick, is just understanding, do the right thing at the right time, and then install the systems and operations and feedback loops so that it's sustained, and then go do the next thing.
I want to jump back to, you've described your relationship with Dan, and that's for those that are familiar with Rocket Fuel, which is part of the EOS series. That's the visionary integrator relationship. If for people listening that are currently running a business by themselves and aren't that rare 1 to 3% of the population that is both a visionary and an integrator, how would you go about getting an integrator or just partnering up if you essentially can't afford to just hire someone on 200K on your headcount?
Yeah, that's the selfish plug, is that's what we do, is plug in an integrator. But the reality is, it's not as big of a problem as people think if you really master this, because let's say it's probably $80,000 a year to get I think it's 50 to 80 grand a year to get like a COO type, right? If you actually just focus on removing the number one issue, which is sales, then you just paid for your COO times 100. The issue, you focus on 10 different things, right? So the way we look at it is always, when it comes to like solopreneur, or the way I tend to look at it, is either you do it yourself, which is like sledding uphill for a visionary to build systems, or you realize like, hey, look, I got to get $5,000 a month. That's what it's going to cost for me to have somebody else here. Now, what's my limit from getting extra $5,000 a month? There's my limit. And then you just do the thing that generates $5,000 a month, and you plug somebody in. And so we're always looking at, okay, what's the next move, and how do we get it to pay for itself? Can we get it done without going into the red, so to speak? In early stages, generally, like if you're a solopreneur, just focusing on the thing, and let's say this case, it's to pay for an employee. The thing is like, it's got to be sales. And if you really actually identify the limit and you really reverse engineer or develop a thing to solve the limit, it should pay for that next step, which would be hiring somebody. If you keep trying to do everything, you're always just going to be, it's like chicken egg, right? Like, I got to hire somebody, but I don't have the money. But I won't have the money until I hire somebody. If that's how you feel, then I guarantee you are focusing on too many things.
That's super insightful. I think the other thing is, so firstly, we're talking different currencies potentially for people listening. But to have that 80K employee be productive, they really need to work within a framework such as your velocity framework or someone's methodology, because they're not going to be sufficiently senior and experienced to like come up with the framework and manage and execute improvements and day to day. And I think that's a common mistake people make when they try to hire an operations guy, is just get them to do everything.
Yeah, biggest mistake. And this is going to fly in the face of what a lot of people say. It's not contradictory. It's just another level, right? What everybody thinks is that they want to hire an A player that's going to be like me, right? Like I'm thinking like, if I just find somebody like me, but here's the thing, I wouldn't work for me. I would not work for $4,000 a month. So automatically you can't rely on A players. If you find them, great. Which means you have to have a framework that an average COO can follow, and an average COO does not have the visionary gene that you have as a founder. And so I think that's the biggest, I'll just hire someone, I'll incentivize them to figure it out. And you're really asking them to do something that they're not very good at. So you do need a framework, and it should have feedback loops, and it should be improving itself all the time. And there's redundancy built in too, because even if you do find an A player, the mistake is, oh, I found an A player. It's cool. They got it handled. So you don't build the framework or you half-ass build it. And then that A player is kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of got you by the balls. Like they run your whole business and none of it's documented. So they can either demand whatever they want or just walk away and it'll collapse. So yeah, you have to have the framework. There are plenty of them out there that are sufficient. But we have companies. I've had a company that had 13 employees and no project management framework at all. After a week with us, I think they had 4 employees.
Yeah,
because they only had enough work for like 3 full-time people, but due to a lack of framework, they just kept hiring. Like, oh, I'll hire another person; they'll figure it out. Well, now that person's busy. I'll hire another one, and that's what we do. That's what my first companies were like.
I made that mistake in my last business. I had a CTO who was an A player, and what I have this process. It's basically a virtual org chart. So I map out if we're a 5-person company now, but if we wanted to be a 50-person company, what would we look like? And then I worked out how many hats we were all wearing. I was at the time wearing 17. He was wearing 13. And the most anybody else in the company had was 2. And that was the difference between the A player. Not that I'm saying this was a good idea or not, but it was like literally only the A players can cope with that kind of misdirection. And the other mistake I made was with software development. We had a team of A players. And then I realized that we were reliant on the team of A players. We didn't have processes. The moment I got a B player in the team, they not only were unproductive, they cost the rest of the team money.
Yep. And again, just words of warning to people listening. A players specifically, and it's no different with sports, right? Like they just choose not to practice and they can do that because they're an A player. So what happens, especially in software, I've seen this in software. I don't have a ton of background in software, but similar, we have a CTO, or we had one, and being an A player, he just got stuff done, right? Then when he left, you realize the language, like the coding, was his own. Nobody had any idea, right? Like where stuff was, and because it wasn't processed out that this is how we do things here. This is the language we use. This is what this means. This is what that means. You lose the redundancy. You're very, very fragile if you don't have a framework to document and make all these things repeatable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not, just to clarify, we're not talking about literally documenting everything in the business. It is, let's focus around the one thing and build a high-level framework that works across every process, basically, and then drill down only where you need to, I think.
Yeah. And just, it's, it's important. And again, I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but people all the time say, college is useless and yada, yada, yada. But here's the benefit to me of like, I would, if I ran a tech company or really any company, and I hire 50 people to work on a team, it is extremely, extremely beneficial to know that they've all gone through the same curriculum and use the same language. Right? You could have a bunch of people that are self-educated and they're brilliant, but they're going to be having conversations and having 2 different conversations because they didn't go through the same curriculum. They don't use the same softwares. They don't use the same language. And the way to replicate that in the business is through like processes. Like this is the language we use. So that when we need to communicate something, we're doing it effectively. And so that's when people knock college, I'm kind of like, if I had a team of engineers, I want them all speaking the same language, so I want them all to have gone through the same curriculum and use the same slang. And, but you can replicate that through process. It's just have a way to remove the ambiguity, especially in a company that is considered to be agile, where you're pivoting directions all the time. You want to make sure that when you go, yeah, I'll have that done, that you have the same definition of done.
That's my favorite phrase from Agile, actually. It's definition of done.
Yep. We say complete criteria.
Yeah.
What is the complete criteria? Because coders go, yeah, when the code's done, it's done. Whereas the marketing department is like, well, when the user interface is ready to use, it's done. And if that's not clear, then you're going to go, hey, we're ready to launch, and find out real quick that you're not actually ready to launch.
Even there, again, fascinating. You use that language, like you kind of referred to a process as a language in a way. And so that's taking that behavioral element and weaving it across the whole business. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, we worked hard on taking the good stuff, developing our own language around it, and just some of it, again, velocity versus speed, right? Trying to remove the ambiguity. Very, very intentional about language.
So to sort of summarize, what I heard here is a couple of things, some of which we've talked about, but you, and I don't see many real world businesses doing this, to be honest. I see a lot of internet marketers doing it and coaches and consultants, but you went and sought people who were ahead of you. And in your case, I mean, you're working with the Abraham Group. It's like drastically ahead of you and you're pretty far ahead of most people. So that, I think that mentorship is really important and people are perhaps missing that. You also talked about partnerships. So you're not necessarily trying to own and do everything yourself.
No, and it's a lot of it's my personality. I'm not an expert, and I am fascinated with a lot of what I do is just trying to understand things better. So there's a few things that I do. I'm always seeking mentorship. All of my partnerships, all of my companies have come from seeking mentorship. You saying, wow, you're the best in the world at what you do. I want to learn from you. And then them saying, wow, you understand what I'm saying and you can articulate it because you have that cognitive behavior background, right? And we build companies together because the real experts are like, just want to like sit in a dungeon and do technical stuff, you know? They don't want to market and they don't want to sell. So yeah, I'm always seeking counsel, and it's always in different domains. I really like to see how people, like internet marketers, are a very strange bunch. But I have a farmer from North Dakota in one of my programs. Spent a lot of time with him. Like, how do you make millions of dollars on a farm? Like, this is interesting. And just Dan Nicholson is a top 10 firm, right? He's got Nth-degree CPAs in Seattle. How do you become a top 10 financial advisor? You know, and so I just really interested in learning from these people. And I think business owners that don't do that are at a huge disadvantage, because especially like whatever industry you're in, if you sell car parts, right? And just sitting in a room, like you have 5 locations that sell car parts just really well. You sit in a room with somebody that owns a burger joint that's doing really, really well. And those are both clients of mine that I have, right? And you realize, like, wait, you have a local business here in California and you sell burgers and you do it this way. I could probably take that concept. Nobody's doing that over in auto parts, right? And so there's a lot of concepts that are super standard in one industry that have not been used in another industry. And that's where like there's gold mines there. So just not seeking counsel. And if you were to seek counsel, I would recommend you find people ahead of you. And you also find people that are like around where you're at or a little bit ahead in completely seemingly unrelated domains.
That's fantastic advice. And I think the other one you touched on right at the start is, you know, design the business around the lifestyle that you want. Because I know so many people that are struggling through hustle and grind, and it's always one more sale away or one funnel away, and then they'll have the lifestyle. But you've actually reverse engineered the business structure and strategy from the lifestyle you want from day one.
Yeah. Yep. Tried it the other way. There's always the assumption that like, well, after I make $1 million, I'll stop working on the weekends, and it just never comes. It's like, You got to establish those bumpers. And frankly, if you can't make $1 million without working weekends, there's no way you're going to make $10 million without working weekends. You know, you have to build, like, you just have to make better decisions, and we make better decisions and we're more creative when we put limits on ourselves. So don't limit yourself just to limit yourself. You may as well make those limits serve the quality of your life.
And anyone that follows Nick will know he makes better decisions after a nap.
It's true. I sleep on a lot of stuff. Sleeping on something, man, it's a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Any last words? I mean, that's been fantastic. I'd really encourage people that don't know Nick, follow him, join his group. We'll put links to that below and the Velocity Method as well. You definitely want to check that out. Highly recommend it. Any parting words, Nick?
No, I think I'm just glad to take some time and you know, like, I love talking to people that ask good questions, and you ask good questions. So I appreciate that. And best place, if you're on the Facebooks, the Facebook group is called Profit and Productivity. Drop in there if you're interested. And there's all those really cool people I talked about and all those different businesses. They all hang out in there. So it's just a good place to say, this is what I do. This is my problem. How do you guys address it? And you'll get responses from really smart people.
It's a great community. It's not like many Facebook groups that are full of shameless pictures and people who don't know what they're talking about. So yeah, I'll see you inside there too. Kick them out.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll do our best to keep it that way.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Nick. I really appreciate your time and particularly your insight. That was awesome.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you. All right.